Today, we get to do a deep dive into the upcoming NFL draft with the great Mel Kiper Jr. That plus a whole lot more comes up on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for March 21st, 2024.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate it. The show is growing each and every day. It's because of you and my man, Ari. Ari does a great job each and every day. We appreciate him getting us up on YouTube, making sure we're looking good and we're sounding good. You want to hit him up on Twitter, you can. I encourage you to, at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well, at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. As many of your calls and texts as possible coming up in segment number 3. Lots of feedback we've been getting off the conversation. We've been having some really good conversations, Raider Nation. I got to tip my cap to you for coming with some really good stuff each and every day. So I definitely appreciate that. We'll get your calls and texts coming up, segment number 3. Segment number 2 and partial part of segment number 1, we'll have some Mel Kiper Jr. breakdowns. Just that simple. Had an opportunity on Wednesday to catch up with them on a conference call. It was really cool to be on there for a couple hours and talked about quarterbacks, first-round quarterbacks, second, third-round, fourth-round quarterbacks, offensive tackles, guards, cornerbacks, wide receivers, speed, and more speed, and, of course, a little bit of different teams that what teams could be looking at in the draft. So we're obviously not going to be able to get to everything on today's show, but try to get to as much as possible. Try to break it up in 2 segments. Basically, segment number 1, when we have the Mel Kiper Jr. breakdowns, we'll do quarterbacks in round 1, or the ones that he expects to go in round 1. Remember, he had 5 of them. And then in segment number 2, we'll kind of do other. Right, so second and third round quarterbacks, and then some tackles and guards. We'll focus in on that on today's show. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we got coming up for you. Again, excited about the opportunity on this Thursday, March 21st. Before we get into any of that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. I'll tell you a lot more about them later on in the show, but today is a big day. Today is when the Locked On Podcast Network, we do our mock draft, and I got to get my Tom Telesco on. What I've got to do is I got to represent for the Raiders. So every one of the hosts on the Locked On NFL Podcast Network, like all of us that are doing shows on NFL teams, we have to be the ones responsible to make the picks when it comes to the first round. We do this each and every year. If you've been rocking with this show for quite a while, you know how it shakes out. I'm a guy that I've traded back a couple times. I've stuck in puck, stuck in puck, like it's hockey, sticked and picked. I guess that's whatever. It's some kind of cool saying that I obviously can't say. I've had the stick and pick type approach. How about that? I had to be careful there. It almost sounded a little bit dirty, right? I'm not trying to do this. It's a family show. But you know what I mean. I've stayed at that same spot. I've made the pick, got the best player available at the time. Well, I got to try to get a little froggy, man. I got to try to get aggressive. I've been talking about it all summer long, been talking about it all off season, basically. I say summer, it's not even summer yet, it's just now spring, but all off season long, and got to try to go and make a move to get up to number 2 and go get the quarterback. I say that I think the Raiders are going to put their best forward and try to do that, so I'd be silly if I didn't try to do that as well. So I'll tell you right now, Raider Nation, I've already begun negotiations. I've already reached out to number 2 and already started to put the groundwork in. I've already started to let him know what I'd be willing to move off of. And, well, he's sitting on it right now. He tried to counter. I'll say that right now. He tried to counter and say, well, how about this? And I said, look, man, I got an offer on the table. If you're serious about talking, let's talk. If you're not serious about talking, then let's not. But I got an offer on the table. So, you either make a decision or you don't. Like I said, we're not counter-offering way ahead of time, right? We'll just do it. If you're serious, we can get into the conversation. So if you remember, Daniel Jeremiah, when I had him on the conference call, I asked him what it would take for the Raiders to go from 13 to 3. And basically said it's a first-round pick swap, 13 overall to number 3, and then a first and a third in 2025 and a first in 26. So, one, I don't think that that's a lot. I really don't. I always thought that you had to put a little bit of sugar on it, but then trying to get to number 2, clearly I feel like you got to do a little bit more than that. So I've already put a pretty strong offer in, one that I think is reasonable but strong at the same time. So we'll see what happens. If I can get up to number 2, Jaden Daniels is the guy, and he's a Raider quarterback according to our mock draft, right? Then I'll roll with it. If not, then I'll stick and pick, and I'll think about Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell. I'll think about Byron Murphy, the top offensive tackle, and then I'll think about Michael Penix, and I'll do it in that order. So I'll just let you know already, kind of taking you behind the scenes of the Locked On Podcast Network mock draft that we will get going this afternoon, a little bit later on this afternoon. I look forward to that. Now, I do want to jump into some Mel Kiper Jr., little breakdowns. We'll do first-round quarterbacks according to Mel. Remember, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Caleb Williams, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix. He believes all those guys can go in the first round. Caleb Williams, don't have to really do a breakdown on him. We know whoever gets number 1, Chicago or Washington, they're gonna pick Caleb Williams. Obviously, it looks like it's going to be Chicago, no doubt about it, even though I thought there was a piece of me that thought Washington had an opportunity to maybe trade up, and maybe they do, but they haven't done it as of yet. So we'll start with Jaden Daniels and Drake May. And here's Mel talking about the difference he sees between Jaden Daniels and Drake May, and how big is that gap between the two?
In terms of Jaden and Drake, I gave Jaden the edge based on just performance. I mean, he played great, lights out all year, had a good year in 2022, but he kind of did what Joe Burrow did. He went from being really good, solid, to being spectacular. And that's what Joe did at LSU his second year. That's what Jaden did his second year at LSU after transferring in from Arizona State. He put on some weight, Jaden did. When you think about where he is now as a passer, he can make any throw. His deep ball accuracy to Brian Thomas Jr. and the neighbors. His ability to keep his eyes up when he's rolling. He did that as a player in 2023, where in 2022 that was a little bit of an issue. He saw the field a lot better. He let it rip. He trusted what he saw. He trusted his receivers when they were open. He fired when they were covered. He let it go, and they trusted the receivers to make plays, and he trusted what he was seeing more. He's a kid who the players really gravitated to at LSU, which was important. He became a really good leader. His performance was Lamar Jackson-like. He's drawing comparisons. Herm Edwards compares him to Randall Cunningham. I think Jaden solidly. I think he's right there as the solid 2. I think you could argue he's right there with Caleb as the number 1 quarterback in this draft. I think there's a little separation between Jaden and Drake May. I disagree with some people that think Drake's ahead of Jaden or right there with Jaden. I think there's a separation there. I think J.J. McCarthy's pressuring Drake May more than Drake May's pressuring Jaden Daniels.
So there goes Mel right there, and he's talking about Jaden Daniels is closer to battling with number 1 with Caleb Williams than Drake May is with battling with him for number 2. Right? Matter of fact, talking about J.J. McCarthy is closer to battling with Drake May than Drake May is with Jaden Daniels. So that to him is the big separation. He broke it down on why. Speaking of J.J. McCarthy, tough evaluation. We're basically talking about we think he could do something that we never saw him do in college. That's what the consensus is. Yeah, well, he wasn't asked to do it, but it doesn't mean he can't. Well, how do you know that? Right? You don't know that. So here's Mel breaking down how tough an evaluation Michigan's J.J. McCarthy is.
He, to me, is kind of a wild card, Jordan. I kept saying to people in the league, I'm waiting for him to have that game where you say, he's a top 5 pick. He's a top 10 pick. He's a mid-first rounder. He was the toughest player really at any position to really evaluate because they didn't ask him to carry the team. Most college quarterbacks were asked to be the guy, to make plays, run in, throw in, just get the ball out like Bo Nix throwing it to everybody, running the football, doing everything. Jaden Daniels doing everything at LSU, right? He wasn't asked to do that. They had Blake Corum. They had Donovan Edwards. They had 9 men deep on the O-line. They had the multiple tight ends. They had receivers. Roman Wilson was a nice receiver. Cornelius Johnson. They had some decent, no great receiver, excuse me, but they had a good group. But he wasn't asked at Michigan to carry that team. Heck, against Penn State, when he threw one pass and it was a penalty, so he didn't get credit for one pass in the second half. How many guys late in the year when you need a football game desperately to win doesn't throw a pass in the second half? He's going to be a top 5, top 10 pick. That hasn't happened. So to say what J.J. McCarthy's going to be, you got to have a leap of faith there, as he's a great competitor. He's a Josh Allen type competitor. He's super smart. He's just turned 21 years of age. He had two really good years. He didn't throw picks, but the picks he did throw were kind of memorable. The 2 pick sixes against TCU, the pick before the half against Maryland, right? You remember those picks, the 3 against Bowling Green early this past year. But he didn't throw many, but they were memorable. Then in the national title game, he did make a couple plays in that game that were game changing. Remember those when he ran and he got him out of the hole and he flipped field position. He had a couple great throws that were dropped, one to Loveland, one to Cornelius Johnson. So he really played well in that game. Nothing, but he was unfazed in that national title game. They were challenged. And he got it done when he had to. So, and wasn't much margin for error there. When you don't throw the ball much, it's kind of like the old school days of 20 to 25 throws, even in the NFL. You weren't throwing it all over the yard. You know, you miss a throw. Who cares? We're going to throw it the next 6 times anyway. That wasn't JJ's deal. He didn't, when he threw it, it had to mean something. It had to happen. So it was a little bit more pressure there, and it was more NFL like. So I think for JJ, he's a tough evaluation. Does he deserve to go 6? To the Giants or in that 11-12 spot, based on everything we know about quarterbacks and what's happened in the past? I don't think I'd have a problem with it. It's higher than I would take him based on grade, but you say it's overdrafting. All these quarterbacks to a certain extent get overdrafted and pushed up because they're quarterbacks and they've shown great promise. So for JJ at 6, I'm not going to sit there and say it's a decision they're going to have to make because he did not have to carry that team. And that's just the way it was. It wasn't any knock against him. Any quarterback there would have been in the same situation. So, and he played well, like I said, when he had to.
Very lengthy answer right there from Mel on J.J. McCarthy. And that just lets you know how, I don't want to say frustrating, but how tough that evaluation is. It's very hard to go out there on faith alone and say, yeah, I know we didn't see him do it, but I believe he can do it. Like, what's the merits of that? Right? It's like me telling someone that like my whole life I've been dunking a basketball, but no one's ever seen me do it. But, oh, yeah, Q could do it. Well, how do you know that? Well, he said he can. Well, has anyone ever seen him do it? Well, I mean, no, but he can, right? I mean, he says he could jump. Yeah, okay. Right? I mean, it's hard to just go out there and believe someone and trust in someone, especially when you're investing a top pick on a guy and you just haven't seen him do it. So somebody's going to do it. It looks like Minnesota might be the team if they trade up to that number 4 spot, which apparently, according to reports out there, the Cardinals have already said that number 4 is open for business. So that to me is not a big surprise or a shock. And I do think Minnesota will be the one now they have that number 23 overall pick that they picked up last Friday from the Houston Texans. They'll package number 11, they'll package 23 and put a little sugar on it probably to get up to number 4 and grab J.J. McCarthy. Finally, Bo Nix, a guy that Mel had mock draft to the Denver Broncos because of the Drew Brees type comparisons that he has. At least he thinks that's what Sean Payton's going to see in Bo Nix. Here's Mel Kiper breaking it down a little bit about Bo Nix and why he thinks that Denver would be the spot for him.
Yeah, he got it to Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin was wide open deep. Troy Franklin was vertical stretch. Troy Franklin made a lot of big plays for that offense. He also had with Ferguson and Tez Johnson. He had a lot of weapons. He had Bucky Irving and James Wright. He had running backs. He had the O-line with Jackson Powers Johnson and company. He had it all going there. And he had a system where it was able to get the ball out and the gate pass rush. And he was super accurate. He was at 77%. He didn't throw picks and he could beat you with his legs. So I think what I said yesterday when all the shows I did, when I was asked about Bo Nix, I think that Sean Payton will see a lot of Drew Brees in Bo Nix. Very similar, hand size the same. Drew was 6'1.5", Bo's 6'2", but they're both 215. They both had, I think, with Parcells and Sean, it was always veterans, guys that started a lot of games. I mean, Bo Nix has started a ton of games at Auburn and Oregon, battling through adversity at Auburn. His dad was a quarterback there. He was a highly recruited kid, goes to Auburn, supposed to be the guy. It didn't work out there, even though he had some games at Auburn where he was really impressive, but it didn't work out there. Then he goes to Oregon and he puts everything together. He's 24 years of age. He's a mature professional already. I think Sean Payton, as I said, he doesn't have the big time arm. Did Drew Brees have a big time arm coming out? No, he did not. That's why he was the first pick in the second round. So I think when you look at Bo Nix, I think that's why I just went on a hunch. It wasn't anything I heard. It was just some common sense hunch that they don't have a second round pick, so trading up is going to be very difficult for Denver. I just you're in a division with Mahomes and Herbert, and the AFC with Josh and Lamar and Burrow and all. Yeah, you got to get a quarterback somehow, some way. Jarrett Stidham may be okay, but you're going to get excited about Jarrett Stidham's potential. Maybe he develops with Sean May. Who knows? But I thought Bo Nix made sense because of the comp to Drew Brees. When I looked at Drew Brees' numbers and Bo Nix's numbers, it was eye opening. And whether Sean sees that or not, I don't know. I mean, who knows how he feels? If I were in his shoes and I had Drew Brees, I'd see a little bit of that in a guy like Bo Nix.
So there goes Mel talking about Bo Nix and giving the reasons why he believes Denver would be the spot and why Sean Payton would be interested in him. Again, he says it's nothing that he's been hearing. It's just kind of his gut feeling. So we'll see how that shakes out. But that's 5 quarterbacks in the first round. No Michael Penix, and the Raiders didn't get a quarterback either. All those quarterbacks went 1 through 12, according to Mel. So, of course, I had to ask the question about Michael Penix. You'll hear that coming up in segment number 2, plus a little bit on the tackles and a little bit more on segment number 2 as we continue with Mel Kiper Jr., his breakdowns from the pre-draft conference call on Wednesday. That's next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor, which is FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament that gets started today, baby. Let's go. One of the days that should be probably a holiday across the calendar, the first day of March Madness. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed going all the way, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all and cut down those nets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops until they do just what I said. Cut down the nets. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to continue with the pre-draft conference call breakdowns from Mel Kiper Jr. He'll have another one coming up. I think his next mock draft drops April 10th, so we'll have another one of these conference calls leading up to the NFL draft, which is taking place in Detroit, Michigan, the 25th through the 27th. I will be there. I'm excited about that opportunity and, of course, excited to bring that to the Locked On Raiders podcast. But let's go ahead and start off with the quarterback that was not mentioned as a first-round pick, a guy that we've talked about quite a bit here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and that's Michael Penix. So I asked the question to Mel. You'll hear me ask the question about all the quarterbacks going in the first round. The Raiders didn't get one, and Michael Penix wasn't one of them, and his thoughts on that and a little bit more on Michael Penix Jr. Here he is, Mel Kiper. Mel, thanks for doing this for us. In your last mock draft, you had 5 quarterbacks going in round 1, and Michael Penix was not one of them, and the Raiders did not get one of them. What are your thoughts on Michael Penix, and if he is the Raiders guy, do they have to take him at 13 in fear of someone else picking him up before them?
Well, you could move off of 13 and move down and acquire some extra choices. Michael Penix Jr., the big thing is the injuries. I think that's the main thing. The 4 injuries, you think about the shoulder, the knee. Bottom line is if he can stay healthy, he can spin it. He can make throws to every point of the field. He's got off platform. He's not as effective as some of these other quarterbacks. So you got to protect him. You got to have a really good offensive line there because of the durability question, the injuries at Indiana. Now he was outstanding at Washington, but you got to give him a clean pocket. When he's off platform and you get around him, you saw that in the national title game, his accuracy wanes a little bit. So I think he needs talent around him. He had it at Washington. Obviously, the national title game, they were able to get some heat on him. Like I say, off platform is not his game. So I think when you look at Michael Penix Jr., you need to help him. He needs to be in the right situation. But when he gets time, he can spin it. And he's accurate to every level.
So there you go. He wasn't real detailed on it, wasn't real lengthy on it, but kind of let it be known that the injuries are something that really concern him. Right. And that's something that cannot be ignored. And that's probably the reason why he'll end up being a second-round pick. Now, he didn't necessarily say that, but you could tell that he was, well, you could just trade back. You could move back. Like, it was nothing about, I thought about putting him in there at number 13. Again, remember on his mock draft, he put J.C. Latham, who is a true right tackle, put him there at the number 13 spot for the Raiders and said that, you got to get that offensive line solidified. I don't disagree with that, but you can see he was pretty nonchalant when it came to Michael Penix. So another question was asked to Mel about day 2 or day 3 quarterbacks that could be available, and I don't think it was a slight on purpose, but he doesn't mention Michael Penix here either. Here's Kiper talking day 2 or day 3 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to – it's like a tough call to find the right one. The guys that are going to be in that mix are Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, who certainly has the arm talent and had some really good games at South Carolina, transferring in there. Michael Pratt from Tulane isn't going to wow you over with any great trait, but he's a winner. He elevated that program. Obviously beat Caleb in that bowl game 2 years ago. The game where it was who had the ball last, the Tulane USC game, the bowl game. Doesn't have great arm strength, but he's accurate. He's a good decision maker. He can beat you with his leg. He can beat a defense with his legs on 3rd and 12. He can run and get that first down for you and keep the drive alive. He's probably that 5th, 6th, 7th round guy that you would take a chance on at that point. Rattler may go a little higher. Joe Milton III's got big time arm strength. I think he probably throw it 75 yards. But the accuracy, decision making with him needs to improve. But somebody wants to take a chance on arm strength. Remember, he went from Michigan to Tennessee, had those 2 really big games late in 2022 against South Carolina and Clemson. You thought it would carry over to this season, that he would become like Hendon Hooker was, great in that system. Hooker transferred from Virginia Tech, had that big year, then injured late, and obviously became a 3rd round pick because of that. You thought Milton could be kind of that guy, and he wasn't. So now he's a day 3 quarterback, but he's going to roll the dice on a big arm. It could be him. Jordan Travis at Florida State had a really good year going until he was hurt late. Carter Bradley, Gus's son, as an overachiever who just finds a way, transferred to South Alabama, had some good moments there. So Carter Bradley, kind of like a Michael Pratt, that type of guy, late in the draft could be a possibility. So, those are, I'd say Rattler goes the highest of that group, and then Pratt, and then you get into the guys late, like I just mentioned, like if you want to take a chance on Milton or a Travis or a Bradley.
So there you go. You hear the day 2, day 3 quarterbacks, and really he's leading things off with Spencer Rattler. And that's a guy that I have on my list. It's Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, Spencer Rattler, right? Those are the 3 guys that I'm really looking in and focusing in on. And, there's still, that would remain a lot of questions, right? I mean, because Spencer Rattler, there's no telling that he can actually develop into a franchise quarterback. Aiden O'Connell, you saw what he was able to do. He was obviously able to, continue to grow his rookie year. And then Gardner Minshew, he's around for a couple years. He's got the 2-year, $15 million contract. So if those 3 quarterbacks were in the quarterback room, to me, there's still a lot of questions. Michael Penix, I feel like, okay, there's a little bit more faith that he could become a franchise quarterback for the Silver and Black. But one of the things I talked about on my radio show on Wednesday is things that would disappoint me. What would disappoint me the most if the Raiders, if I woke up on the 28th of April and this happened in the draft, and that my number one thing was the Raiders came away with it with, not feeling like they have their franchise quarterback, their guy of the future. That would disappoint me the most. There were some really good answers to that, but that was the one for me. So I really feel like they got to do everything that they can to get their franchise quarterback, which is why I'm doing everything I can to get the franchise quarterback in the Locked On Podcast Network, the mock draft that we got going on. I'm excited about if I'm able to pull off a big trade or not, and if not, what talent I will get. But continuing on with Mel Kiper's breakdowns, little pre-draft conference call that he had on Wednesday that I was able to be a part of. How about the guards, right? The Raiders need right tackle and right guard. That whole right side of the offensive line needs a little bit of work. They've got guys like Thayer Munford. They got guys like Dalton Wagner. They don't even have technically a right guard right now on the roster, right? I mean, you could put a guy like DJ Fluker in there, but you're kind of, you don't know what you have in DJ Fluker. But yeah, he's definitely still there. So here's Mel on the guards to be on the lookout for.
The guard position, I think, is where you can wait a little bit. And that's where, like I say, there's going to be, you look at a Graham Barton as a guard center, but I think you can wait a little bit down the line. You can't wait to tackle too much because there are some 2nd, 3rd round tackles, but a lot of those guys are going to go early. At guard, Zach Zinter would have been a solid 2, injured late out of Michigan. He's coming back. He's going to be healthy for training camp. He's a 2nd or 3rd rounder. Fa'utanu from Washington, I have as the number 1 guard, but some have him as a left tackle because his arm length was actually better than Joe Alt, if you can believe it, which was pretty amazing. So he's still a factor at tackle. Fa'utanu is, which would make guard wide open. Most of the guards have 2nd, 3rd, 4th round grades. Guys like Christian Mahogany at Boston College, Christian Haynes at Connecticut, Dominic Pooney, a versatile guy, can play anywhere out of Kansas. Cooper Beebe, Kansas State, short arms would bother you a little bit, but a good player. You think about where LeMaya at Utah is a guy in the 4th, 5th round I like. Mason McCormick at South Dakota State's a good day 3 guy. A talented kid who was inconsistent on tape, but he's really talented. And when he was good, he was really good. Is Layden Robinson at Texas A&M. Just keep an eye out for him as a day 3 guy. You're going to be saying in 2-3 years, why did he drop? He's so talented. He was really good. On his best days, Layden Robinson looked like a 2nd round pick. He may not go to the 4th or 5th round.
So there's Mel talking about a few guards. So wanted to make sure we got a couple names to throw out there. Some guys that, we could be on the lookout for that the Raiders may be interested in as they try to put together that right side of the offensive line. So if you're going to look at the guards, you got to look at the tackles. And one question I thought was pretty interesting. We only got a couple more here in segment number 2, but I thought this was a very interesting question was right tackles in the draft that could eventually slide over to the left tackle position. Now, I talked to Donald Penn on my radio show on Wednesday, and he said, man, it is so difficult to play one position, one side, and then all of a sudden slide over to the other. He came into the league as a right tackle, got comfortable at the left tackle spot, and then Gruden tried to put him over at the right tackle spot, and it just wasn't working. Everything was backwards, and like he said, it was bad. I don't even want to talk about it. So here's Kiper talking about right tackles that could eventually transition to the left tackle spot.
In terms of Blake Fisher at Notre Dame, a right tackle with a good skill set. Joe Alt was a left tackle. Blake Fisher was a right tackle. People haven't talked enough about him in terms of the development he could have in the NFL as a guy who has talent and has potential. I think you look at where we are right now with Patrick Paul at Houston, left tackle with unbelievable arm length, but raw in terms of technique. It's a little sloppy with his technique. Javon Foster at Missouri, the Suamataia. Jordan Morgan's a left tackle. I think will be more of a guard because he doesn't have great arm length, but he has the feet to be a left tackle. Came back from the injury. Now will be 2 years removed, so he could be interesting. But I think if you look at Roger Rosengarten in the second round, if he doesn't go in the late first as a right tackle, has a pretty good skill set. And he could drop into the second. I put him into first. Nobody else has mocked him into first. Some don't even have. I think even when I did that, some people are saying, I don't even see him in second round. So I like some of the potential of Roger Rosengarten from Washington, but there's a lot of mixed opinion there on him. But I think Blake Fisher's the intriguing guy when you get into the third round out of Notre Dame if he drops that far.
So there's a couple more names right there to pay attention to, the right tackles. But we had the question, this will be the final soundbite for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We had the question posed to me on Wednesday's podcast about the zone blocking scheme because of the conversation I was having with Tashawn Reed. And it was like, okay, Q, find out about the right tackles that excel in the zone blocking scheme. So this actually closed out our conference call on Wednesday. I actually got a couple questions in. You'll hear the question about the right tackles and that zone blocking scheme. Here it is. Want to know about just kind of the true right tackles that you see in this draft and ones that excel in the zone blocking scheme?
Well, I think in terms of the right tackle spot, there's some guys that have the ability to do both. The best right tackle in this draft is J.C. Latham from Alabama. He's the Joe Alt's a left tackle. Fashionu's a left tackle with Penn State. Fuaga's a right tackle. Latham, though, is a mauler, is a run block. He's fun to watch because he just destroys people. And he pass protects very well. He had a couple hiccups in pass protection, as they all do. He feels he has the skill set to be a left tackle. You see evidence of that when you watch him. So J.C. Latham's going to go, I think, in the top 10 to 12 in that area. I think when you look at athletic ability, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, former D lineman turned offensive tackle, could be a left tackle, but as a right tackle, he's a tremendously talented kid. I think when you look at Tali Fuaga at Oregon State, just kind of beats you up, and he keeps that frame between the defensive end and the quarterback very effectively. He's going to go very high in the draft, certainly in the top 15 overall, the way it looks right now. So those are some of the early round guys. In terms of the guys, I think you put pushed down just a bit. If you get Rosengarten in the second, if you get Fisher in the third, as I mentioned before, those would be some right tackles I think have a chance to be really good players in the NFL.
So there you go. A few names right there. They go hand in hand with the zone blocking scheme. And again, J.C. Latham is the name he brought up Tyler Guyton as well, the young man from Oklahoma. He's a guy that probably will go in the back end of round one, but he's a big monster. And the offensive line coach for the Raiders was at Oklahoma's pro day. Now, Guyton didn't work out, but he was there conducting the drill. So clearly he was there speaking with Guyton, spent some time with him. There's no doubt about it. He's going to be there and run through the drills and not talk to the man. So maybe that's a guy that they're potentially looking at that right side as well. But I thought that was a really good question posed to us here on the podcast on Wednesday, and I made sure I wrote it down to bring to the conference call later on that afternoon. So thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. Speaking of questions, text, calls, that's coming up next. The Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll get your feedback next as we close out the show on this Thursday on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, we do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, which is BetterHelp. And a lot of us, we spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best ways to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. I couldn't have a lot more time. If I had a lot more time, I'd probably find a way to do more shows, and that is not what I need. But again, a lot of folks do think about how to get more time, how to figure out what they would do with their time, and sometimes you may need to talk to somebody. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and text draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a text from Air Raid Vic in the 757. He said, hey, Q, what are your thoughts about flipping the script? Pick Penix at 13, then trade it up in the second or into the back half of the first for a right tackle. Penix being left-handed means the right side becomes his blind side. Who would be available and worthwhile in that zone? Let's go Raiders. That's not a bad suggestion. I've heard that a couple times, and I think it really honestly comes down to the evaluation, right? Where do the Raiders view Penix? Do they look at him as a guy at 13? Do they look at him as a franchise quarterback? Like, we're talking about him like that, but we don't know. And then who would be left, right? And I guess you got to kind of compare and contrast and look to the different teams that are behind the Raiders and think, all right, is a right tackle potentially going to go off? I think Guyton would be the best one in the back end of round number 1, like I talked about a little bit earlier, the big man out of Oklahoma. He'd probably be the best option at that point. But I do like the idea. I know we've had a few other people suggest it, but I do think that's a pretty good idea. Air Raid Vic, thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider Dog in the 509. He's calling to talk about the 13th overall pick and what he thinks the Raiders should do with it, and also addresses the quarterback position. Here he is, Raider Dog, the 509.
Hello, Q. This is Raider Dog out of the 509. I've been listening to your podcast for some time and others as well involving the Raiders. And my thought is at 13, they trade back and get an extra second round pick as well as the best right tackle on that's available when they do draft in the first round with whoever they trade with. And then in the second, maybe take their 2 second round picks and go back up into the first, or maybe even in the second if they feel like Rattler will drop to them, and then pick up Rattler, and then if they stay in the second with their second round pick, that they pick up the best available corner at that time. So then you have a right tackle drafted off the board, preferably a high end one like the gentleman out of Oregon State, and then you have your quarterback and Rattler. And then you also have a starting cornerback that you could put on the other side of the guy that's already there, number 18. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on it, because I really don't think that anybody's going to be willing to trade up. And I don't know. I got a feeling that the way things are falling, that the top 4 are going to be quarterbacks and then a few wide receivers. And I still think there'll be a strong offensive tackle there that we need, and we're filling up on defense with Wilkins and bringing back 2 of our own, which is awesome. Everything's good there. So I just got a feeling that they're going to address offensive line, because that right side of the line is still needs some help. So anyway, go Raiders. I'm out.
Thanks, Dog. Appreciate you, man. Trading back is definitely a possibility, and you could collect extra picks. But I'll tell you, and this is what I'm going to do in the Locked On Podcast Network mock draft today. I'd rather get an impact player. So if I can't make the move up, which I'm trying to do, I'm being full disclosure, I'm trying to move up to 2. If I can't get there, I'll take a Terrion Arnold at 13. I'll take a Quinyon Mitchell at 13. I'll take, a Byron Murphy at 13. Obviously, these are all if available. I'll take the best offensive tackle there. I'll take an impact player there at 13. And look, if Michael Penix is there at 13 and I don't see that impact player there, I'll roll with Penix at 13. I just think that, it just kind of makes more sense to get whoever could be the most impactful player at that point. Now, if I can get, a Terrion Arnold and Michael Penix is still on the board, I'll go get an Arnold. And then maybe I'll try to trade back up from the second round to the back end of round 1 and see if I can get Penix. I might try to roll the dice and do that. I might really get freaky on this mock draft that we got. I haven't done that before, right? I haven't got freaky. I haven't gone H-Town on them, but I might have to do that, right? So I'm just saying, H-Town, the R&B reference. So for anybody from back in the day, you understand what I'm talking about. Well, Raider Dog, thanks so much for the call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Rhode Island Raider Rob. That's a mouthful right there. He says, hey, Q, appreciate all you do. This is Rhode Island Raider Rob with my thoughts. Everyone's giving their opinion, and I'll throw mine in as well. My thoughts are the offensive line is more important. I'd rather give the quarterbacks that we have more time in the pocket to see the field than scrambling around. I enjoy your show and just win, baby. He's not worried about the quarterback. He's worried about building up the offensive line and protecting the guys that are there, Minshew and O'Connell. And I know there's a lot of folks that are in the O'Connell boat where they think, you know what? He was a rookie. He was in McDaniel's system. He was learning on the fly. He had Bo Hardegree as his, offensive play caller. He was learning on the fly. Give him some more time. Let him go into training camp as the number one, the true number one, or battle it out with Gardner Minshew and see what happens. So he's not worried about a quarterback at 13. He'd rather just go ahead and see the Raiders build up that offensive line and protect the quarterbacks so they have an opportunity to thrive and do what they do and get those playmakers involved. And again, that's not a bad approach. It's something we've talked about here on the show before. So thanks so much, Rhode Island Raider Rob, for that text. Up next, got a call from Hector in San Diego. He's calling to talk about the best player available theory and has an idea that he would like to float out there that he thinks the Raiders could possibly do. Here's Hector in San Diego.
Hey there, this is Hector calling from San Diego, California, representing the Raider Nation. Sometimes we keep hearing that, not going for Penix at 13 or waiting for the best player available, but, it can go both ways, We can actually get our quarterback at 13, whoever that is, because if you're a Raiders player like Devontae Adams on offense or any other star on offense, you also want that big ticket player. We got our big player on defense in free agency, and now, you need to boost that morale on offense, and what better way to send a message that addressing the quarterback need at 13? And we keep saying, best player available, but what if we actually trade back on the 20s for the best corner or the best tackle, We're only looking at it at one way, but it can actually go both ways. Addressing the quarterback at 13 and then, trading back in on the first round in the back end if our top corner is there or tackle is there, and we address both, in the first round on this draft. I don't know. That's what I keep thinking, and hopefully you guys would agree with this. Go Raiders.
Hector, thanks so much for the call. And yeah, look, you could absolutely take Penix at 13 if he's your guy. You could trade back up in efforts to get the cornerback or offensive tackle, like we said earlier in the segment. But it's an order of operations thing, right? How much value do you have in the guys that are at the back end of round one? Do you want the most talented dude in the middle of round one, right? It really is all about what you're targeting, what you're looking at, and who's available and who you're worth risking. Who do you look at and say, yeah, that guy's worth the risk? That's the other part of the equation that you got to come up with. But it's a good theory. Obviously, you're not alone. I'm not mad at that. So we'll see what the Raiders do. We've got just about a little bit over a month before we actually find out what's going to happen in round one. And the beautiful thing is, it's more than just round one. Right? There's 7 rounds of the draft. Who knows what the Raiders will do, what kind of picks they may trade off, what kind of picks they don't trade off. But the good thing is there's more than just one round. So they have an opportunity to really continue to grow and build this team for sure. Got time for about one more. How about a text from Phil in Henderson? He says, my guy Q, it's Phil from beautiful, sunny Henderson, Nevada, with a quick thought on what our nation needs to do in the draft. If quarterbacks are flying off the board like everyone expects, the best way to have your cake and eat it too is grab your guy, Nix or Penix, whoever, just not McCarthy, please. At 13, then trade back into the first to grab the O-lineman or corner that's falling. If the draft is deep in these positions but shallow in quarterbacks at 13, it makes the most sense. I'm disappointed nobody else is talking about this idea. I love the idea for the Raiders, but I love it even more for your draft on Thursday with the network. Something to think about. That's Phil in Henderson. Thanks for the text. I appreciate you. Phil, I'm telling you, man, I'm like DJ Khaled. I'm going all the way up, right? I'm trying to make it happen. I'm trying to make it do what it do. I'm trying to get up to number 2. I really am. That's what I'm trying to do. If not, I'm sticking at 13 and picking the best player available. AP was at Alabama's Pro Day on Wednesday talking to Terrion Arnold, and he told us at the Combine that he would love to have, a third cornerback, a big-time cornerback to go across from Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs, and how that would be important. He also talked about the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. They've already addressed the defensive tackle position, but you could make that a super strength. So I'm trying to go crazy. I'm trying to go a little nuts on them one time, right? I'm about to make it happen. At least I'm trying to make it happen. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what kind of mood I come back to on the show on Friday. I'll just let you know if I do or am able to move up. I'll definitely let you know about it. Of course, on Friday's show. Of course, we'll have more news and notes of the day. Tonight, I'm actually going to be at the Raider facility. I'm not going to be doing my show on ESPN. I'll be at the Raider facility hosting a little alumni event around 6 p.m. Pacific time, so I look forward to that. I'll tell you all about it. Maybe I'll get some audio from it, could bring it back to the show. Of course, there'll be news and notes. There'll be calls and texts. We'll close out the week really strong because, well, that's what we do here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until Friday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it. Got to get up to that number 2 spot, right? Until Friday, Raider Nation, just win, baby.